pick for credit class at a university, buy a book. I had published 13 of my books before I started writing a novel, and all of my books and all of my writing had been nonfiction, with a couple of exceptions. I had written and published and won awards for poetry and some other things, radio plays. But this was really my first book of fiction, and I'm going to describe to you how I learned how to write a novel, and it was by taking classes. There was a person who offered a class on how to write an effective novel, and I took it. Admit what you don't know. You know, one of my great advantages has always been that I have been blonde, and people assume that I'm kind of stupid because I'm a blonde. And I've always taken to heart and proof of this is that whenever I've been in large groups of people that do not know me, and someone says, "You write books, what kind of books do you write?" And my children would run behind that person, always mouth the word, "Oh, do you write children's books?" Because they assume that if you're blonde, you write children's books. And so I wrote and published one just so I could say, "Yes, you're absolutely right, I do." But you know what Dolly Parton said about blonde jokes? She said, dumb blonde jokes. She says, "Dumb blonde jokes don't bother me." She says, "First of all, I know I'm not dumb. And second of all, I know I'm not blonde." And neither am I. But anyway, admit what you don't know. And here's some things. I'm going to run through a list of things, and I hope if you only get one or two of these and they stimulate your thinking, they will help you to be a better writer. One is, especially for people writing about Mormonism, avoid overstatement. It's always better to say something subtly, and you can go back and strengthen it, than it is to say something too harshly and try to back off. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Number two, consider the role of foul language. You have a perfect right to say or write whatever you want to. I'm not here to tell you to do that or not. But recognize that foul language or overstatement whittles down your audience, because there are many people that they read the first thing that is objectionable and they won't read the rest. Do you want your work to be read by the audience that you have in mind? Then consider their objections and try to meet them, especially with language. Take the advice of William Strunk. Strunk and White are one of your resources that I have on your sheet that was passed out there. It's something that every writer should have because it is a guide to good writing. But here's what William Strunk said. Make definite assertions. Avoid tame, colorless, hesitating, non-committal language. In other words, take a stand, find the right language to say what you need to say. Number four, and this is probably the biggest one mistake made by beginning writers or people that want to get published, and that is they use too many passive verbs. Do you know what a passive verb is versus an active verb? An active verb is she vacuumed the carpet. A passive one is the carpet was vacuumed by the woman. You have an example?
President Monson is famous for his passive verbs. Hearts were touched, lives were blessed.
And people fell asleep. That's what happens with passive verbs. If it sounds like a government report, it sounds politically correct, you're making a big mistake. Don't do that. Another thing is a writing principle called show, don't tell. And to illustrate show, don't tell, I'm going to read you the very brief first chapter of Latter-day Cipher. And you tell me, without me having identified specifically what's going on here, you tell me what you learned when I showed you and did not tell you. There on the damp pine needles, Kirsten Young lay on her back, a serene Ophelia in her dusky pond of blood. The dark irises of her bloodshot eyes stared unseeing into the branches above her. The sun had burst through the clouds after the sudden downpour and now blazed above the canopy of conifers and aspens in Provo Canyon. Deep in its recesses, the light filtered down in vertical sheets of champagne dust that played across the body. Her skin, once the faintest of olive, was now as pale as churned cream, mottled in the dark pooling of what everyone called her hot Italian blood. An angry oval bruise, dark as a plum, marked the side of her forehead. The slit in her throat cut deep. Her left arm lay loosely at her side, still bearing at the wrist the friction marks from the plastic rope that had bound her. Her right arm crossed her chest, with the elbow supported by a rock underneath the triceps so the arm stayed in place. Her fingers curled slightly around her own shoulder, as if she gave herself a final hug in death. The tip of her tongue touched delicately the edge of the open wound under her left ear. The scene on the forest floor was meant to set things aright. No, she wasn't Ophelia at all, he thought. She was Eve, temptress and sinner cast from the Garden of Utah, wearing a hasty apron of cottonwood leaves, heaped around and across her plump belly from just below the navel to mid-thigh. Tiny rivulets of blood snaked down through the leaves. The other 4 wounds, the little ones, were post-mortem, made after she'd already bled out. On the right side of her chest, incised with surgical precision, the first cut penetrated deep, a backward L. It depicted a carpenter's square, the straight edge, true maker, indispensable for right angles. The desired angularity could not, alas, be achieved on the soft roundness of the still warm flesh. Nor could the second, the compass. On the left side, a chevron gaped open with edges that wanted to lose their definition, a tiny V on this day of defeats and victories. A 3-inch-long slit carefully cut the muscle just above the knee that would never again bow. A final slit traversed her stomach just above the navel, a sign of nourishment for a body that would never again eat, of health for one who would only decay. They were all symbols only the initiated would understand. But below her navel mark, Kirsten harbored her own tiny secret, one that held the seed of her killer's downfall, her own unwitting fleshly vengeance. In the sheeting light, her murderer stood above her like the angel guarding Eden, his knife sword flashing this way and that in his gloved hands. He had brought along a white sheet he'd bought at a garage sale and kept stored in a plastic bag. But he changed his mind about putting it over her. She was beyond the veil now. His shoulders sagged beneath the once white jumpsuit. The leaves embroidered on the green cloth apron he wore were as speckled as a measles plant. The X-Acto knife lay at his feet, and he picked it up and threw it and the sheet into the stream. Then he laid the note carefully on the ground, its edge secured by a rock. The white cap still contained his close-cropped hair, but had lost its starch definition. It too sagged as he backed away from Kirsten, brushing over with a fallen pine branch the near invisible footprints they had both made when they came to this, his sacred grove. His breathing was heavy as he recited. They said it was the pure Adamic language he'd learned that time at age 19, scared half to death by all the temple vows and the disembodied voices behind the veils. Pele ale, pele ale, pele ale. He swallowed hard. O Lord, hear the words of my mouth. What do you know that I didn't spell out for you there? The woman was murdered? Who has murdered her? Someone with a Mormon background who's been through the temple, who stood before the veil, and who is very interested in taking the symbols of the temple and putting them onto a body for some particular purpose. Well, you have to read the book to find out the rest. But that is an example, and I hope you will indulge me for using myself as an example, but that's an example of showing, not telling. Another thing that is very, very important in writing is using what I call a controlling concept. And that is an image or a phrase or something that kind of acts as a rein or a border for what you're doing. Now, in that passage that I read to you from Latter-day Cipher, this was a man who was taking abstractions, which are symbols, and making them real onto a body. And the entire book is about the interchange, the interplay between what are called facts and representations. It's kind of a brainy book because I'm wanting people to think about the fact that those things that are symbolic in the temple have something behind them, and that you deal not just with the symbols, but what's behind them, as you do with all of Mormonism.